The coffee shop was almost empty that afternoon. Just a few people scattered around, typing on laptops or staring at their phones. Outside, autumn leaves were falling slowly, covering the sidewalk in shades of orange and brown. It was the kind of day when everything felt quiet, even in the middle of the city. David sat in his usual spot near the window. His laptop was open in front of him, but he wasn't really working. He'd been coming to this place for months now, always ordering the same black coffee, always sitting at the same table. It had become a routine, something to fill the empty hours of his day. But today was different. Today, his attention kept drifting to someone across the room. She sat alone at a small table, reading a book. There was nothing particularly unusual about her appearance. She wore simple clothes, jeans, and a gray sweater. Her dark hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail. But something about her made him keep looking. Not in a creepy way, he told himself. It was something else. Something he couldn't quite explain. The third time she caught him staring. She closed her book. David quickly looked away, feeling embarrassed. He pretended to focus on his laptop screen, but he could feel his face getting warm. Great, he thought. Now she probably thinks I'm some weirdo who stares at women in coffee shops. He heard footsteps approaching. When he looked up, she was standing right next to his table. Why do your eyes stay on me, human? She asked. David blinked. The question itself was direct enough, but the way she said it was strange. Who calls someone human like that? It was formal, almost like she was speaking a language she'd learned from books rather than from actually talking. To people, I'm sorry, he stammered. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I didn't say I was uncomfortable, she replied. I asked why, without waiting for an invitation. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. Her eyes were steady, watching him with genuine curiosity. Not angry, not defensive. Just curious. David didn't know what to say. The truth felt too complicated to explain to a stranger. But she kept waiting, patient and still, like she had all the time in the world. You remind me of someone, he finally said. It was partly true, at least. Who? That's the weird part. I don't actually know. There's something familiar about you, but I can't figure out what it is. She tilted her head slightly, considering this. Do you often stare at people who remind you of someone you can't remember? Despite everything, David almost smiled. When you put it like that, it sounds pretty strange. Most human behavior is strange when you really think about it, she said. There it was again. That odd way of speaking. Human behavior. Like she was observing from the outside. Can I ask you something? David said. Why do you talk like that? Like what? You keep saying human like you're not one yourself. For the first time, she showed something other than curiosity. A small smile, almost sad. Old habit. I grew up in a place where we were taught to observe people rather than be like them. It's hard to explain. David understood that feeling more than she knew. The feeling of being separate. Watching life happen to other people while you stood on the sidelines. They sat in silence for a moment. The coffee shop's background music played softly, something acoustic and instrumental. Through the window, David watched a man walking his dog. An old couple sharing a newspaper on a bench. A delivery person rushing past with a stack of boxes. I come here to watch people. He admitted suddenly. That's what I was really doing. Not just looking at you. I watch everyone. She leaned forward slightly. Why? This was the hard part. The part he'd never told anyone. Not even his ex-wife. Maybe especially not his ex-wife. Because they're living, he said quietly. They're just existing in their normal lives. Going to work, walking dogs, buying coffee. And I forgot how to do that somewhere along the way. What happened? David ran his hand through his hair. He was 32 years old, but some days he felt ancient. 5 years ago, my sister disappeared. She went hiking alone and never came back. They searched for weeks, found nothing. No body, no clues, nothing. The woman across from him didn't offer the usual sympathetic phrases people always said. She just listened. After that, everything changed. My marriage fell apart. I couldn't focus on work. I kept thinking that if I just paid attention, If I just looked hard enough, I might see her. In a crowd, on a street corner, anywhere. So I started watching people. Really watching them, and you thought I might be her? No, David said. You don't really look like her, but the way you move, the way you speak directly. She was like that. She didn't play social games. She just said what she meant. The woman nodded slowly. My name is Rebecca. David, can I tell you something? When you were looking at me, I wasn't offended. I was curious because you weren't looking at me the way most people do. You weren't evaluating or judging. You were just seeing. That's rare. I've had a lot of practice seeing, he said with a bitter laugh. It's the living part I'm struggling with. Rebecca reached into her bag and pulled out a notebook. I'm a researcher. I study human behavior, specifically how people handle grief and isolation. I came to this city 6 months ago for my work. That explains the whole human thing, partly, she admitted. But also, I grew up in a very controlled environment. Religious community, very isolated. We were taught that the outside world was dangerous, that regular people were lost. When I left at 19, I had to learn everything from scratch. How to talk to people, how to dress normally, how to exist in the world. Sometimes I still feel like I'm pretending. David studied her face. Behind the direct questions and formal speech, he saw something he recognized, loneliness, the same kind that looked back at him from the mirror every morning. So we're both outsiders. Watching the insiders, he said, it seems that way. They talked for another hour. Rebecca told him about her research, about the book she was trying to write on modern disconnection. David found himself sharing things he'd kept buried for years. How he felt guilty for not moving on. How people expected him to accept his sister's death after a certain amount of time. But how could he accept something when there was no body, no answers, no closure? As the sun started to set, casting long shadows across the coffee shop floor, Rebecca asked him something unexpected. Would you be willing to talk to me again? Not as a research subject, just as someone who understands what it's like to feel separate from everything. David thought about it. His first instinct was to say no, to retreat back into his routine of silent observation. But something about this strange, direct woman made him feel less alone than he had in years. Yeah, he said, I'd like that. Rebecca stood up, gathering her things. Before she left, she turned back to him. You asked why I approached you today. The real reason is that I've seen you here before. Several times, actually. And every time, you looked so sad but so present at the same time. Like you were carrying something heavy but refusing to put it down. I wanted to know what it was. And now you know. Now I know we're both carrying something. She said, maybe that's why your eyes stayed on me. Recognition. After she left. David sat alone in the growing darkness of the coffee shop. For the first time in 5 years, he felt something shift inside him. Not hope exactly, and not healing. But maybe the beginning of both. Next time they met, it was at Rebecca's suggestion. She'd sent him a message through the coffee shop's community board, asking if he wanted to meet at the park. David found it amusing that in an age of phones and social media, she chose such an old-fashioned method. But it felt appropriate somehow. The park was busy that Saturday morning. Families with children, joggers with their earbuds in, elderly people feeding pigeons. David found Rebecca sitting on a bench near the pond, watching a group of ducks swimming in circles. They're surprisingly aggressive, she said as he sat down. People think ducks are peaceful, but they're actually quite territorial. Is this part of your research? David asked. Observing ducks? Everything is part of my research, she replied. Or maybe I just got used to analyzing everything and now I can't stop. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. David had expected their conversation to feel forced in the daylight, without the intimate atmosphere of the quiet coffee shop. But it didn't. If anything, it felt easier. I need to tell you something, Rebecca said finally. When I said I studied grief and isolation, I wasn't completely honest about why. David turned to look at her. She was still watching the ducks, her expression unreadable. I grew up in that religious community I mentioned. We called ourselves a church, but really it was a compound. About 60 people, mostly families. We weren't allowed to watch television or use the internet. No books except approved religious texts. The leaders taught us that everyone outside was lost, that we were the only ones who understood truth. She paused, picking at the peeling paint on the bench. My mother died when I was 12. They told us she'd gone to a better place, that we should celebrate, not mourn. Anyone who cried was punished for showing weak faith. I learned very quickly to hide my feelings, to watch and analyze instead of feel. David felt a weight in his chest. That's horrible. It was just life to me. I didn't know anything different. But when I turned 18, one of the younger teachers secretly gave me books. Real books about science and history and the world. Everything they'd told us was a lie. The outside world wasn't evil. We were the ones trapped. Is that when you left? A year later, I saved up money from the little work they let me do, and one night I just walked away. I had nowhere to go, no skills, no understanding of how normal society worked. But I'd rather be lost in the real world than found in a false one. She finally looked at him, and David saw tears in her eyes that she was trying to control. So when I say I study human behavior, it's because I'm still learning. I watch people because I'm trying to figure out how to be one. Does that make sense? More than you know, David said softly. He told her more about his sister then. Her name was Jennifer, and she'd been 28 when she disappeared. She was a photographer, the kind of person who would chase a sunset for hours just to get the perfect shot. She was impulsive and free in ways David had never been. We were different, he explained. She was always pushing boundaries, always seeking adventure. I was the careful one, the planner. But we understood each other. She was the only person who never made me feel boring for being cautious. What happened the day she disappeared? David took a deep breath. He told this story to police, to search teams, to therapists. But somehow telling Rebecca felt different. She went hiking in the mountains, alone. She did that sometimes, said it helped her think. She was supposed to be back by evening. When she didn't come home, I tried calling. No answer. I drove up to the trailhead and found her car still in the parking lot. The memory was as sharp as ever. The growing panic, the frantic calls to park rangers, the long night of waiting. They searched for 3 weeks. Helicopters, dogs, volunteers, nothing. It's like she vanished into thin air. The official theory is that she fell somewhere inaccessible, or got lost and succumbed to the elements. But they never found any evidence. You don't believe that theory, Rebecca said. It wasn't a question. I don't know what I believe. That's the problem. Without a body, without answers, how do you accept that someone is gone? My wife, my ex-wife now, she tried to be supportive at first. But after 2 years, she said I needed to move on. She said I was choosing Jennifer over our marriage. Were you? David had to think about that. Maybe, but not in the way she meant. I wasn't refusing to move on because I didn't care about my marriage. I was stuck because how do you grieve someone who might still be alive? How do you bury a ghost? Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. In my community, they didn't let us grieve my mother properly. In your life, you can't grieve your sister properly. Different reasons, same result. We're both frozen in a moment we can't escape. They watched the ducks for a while longer. A small child threw bread into the water despite a nearby sign saying not to feed the wildlife. The ducks swarmed eagerly, fighting over the crumbs. I have to tell you something else, Rebecca said quietly. Something I found. David's heart suddenly started pounding. The way she said it, the hesitation in her voice. He knew it was important in my research. I interview people, search databases, look for patterns. Last week, I found a reference to a woman living in an off-grid community in Oregon. No name, but the description matches Jennifer. Late 20s to early 30s, photographer, came there about 4 years ago. The world seemed to stop. David couldn't breathe. It might not be her, Rebecca added quickly. It probably isn't, but I thought you should know. Why didn't you tell me right away? Because I didn't know if I should tell you at all. If it's not her, it will devastate you. If it is her and she doesn't want to be found, that might devastate you more. David stood up, pacing. 4 years ago. That would be a year after Jennifer disappeared. It could be her. It could actually be her. I need to know, he said. Even if it's not her, even if it hurts. I need to know. Rebecca stood up too, facing him. Then I'll help you find out. But David, you need to prepare yourself. If it is Jennifer, you have to consider the possibility that she chose to leave. My sister wouldn't do that. She wouldn't put us through this. People do unexpected things when they're trying to escape something. I did. David wanted to argue, to insist that Rebecca was wrong. But looking at her steady gaze, remembering her story, he realized she understood something he'd been refusing to consider. What if Jennifer hadn't gotten lost? What if she'd wanted to disappear? The thought was almost more painful than believing she was dead. The drive to Oregon took 2 days. David had insisted on going, and Rebecca had insisted on coming with him. They took turns driving his old sedan, watching the landscape change from city to farmland to dense forests. During those long hours on the road, they talked about everything. David told stories about growing up with Jennifer, about how she'd always been the brave one. The time she climbed onto their roof at age 10 to rescue a kitten. The way she quit her office job at 25 to pursue photography full-time. Despite everyone saying it was impractical, Rebecca shared more about her escape from the compound, about the first time she'd seen a movie in a theater and how overwhelming it had been, about learning to use a computer, to navigate a grocery store, to understand jokes and references everyone else took for granted. Sometimes I still don't get things, she admitted as they drove through endless pine trees. Someone will laugh at something and I won't understand why. Or they'll reference a show or a song that everyone knows, and I'm completely lost. That must be lonely, David said. It is. But talking to you helps. You don't make me feel strange for not knowing things. You just explain them. They stopped at a small motel that night, getting separate rooms. David lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow they might find Jennifer, or they might find a stranger and have to accept that the trail had gone cold again. What scared him most was Rebecca's question. What if Jennifer had chosen this? He thought about the months before she disappeared. She'd seemed distracted, quieter than usual. He'd assumed she was stressed about money, about making her photography business work. But what if it was something deeper? What if she'd been planning to leave all along? The next morning, they drove to the address Rebecca had found. It was barely an address at all, just a rural route number leading to a dirt road. They followed it for miles until they reached a clearing with several small cabins. Scattered among the trees, a man in his 50s was chopping wood outside the largest cabin. He looked up as they approached, his expression cautious but not unfriendly. Help you folks? He asked. Rebecca stepped forward. We're looking for someone. A woman who might have come here about 4 years ago. She would have been around 30, interested in photography. The man set down his axe. This is a private community. People come here to get away from their old lives. We don't give out information. Please, David said, his voice cracking. She's my sister. She disappeared 5 years ago. I just need to know if she's alive. The man studied him for a long moment. Then he sighed. There is a woman who fits that description. Goes by Kay, lives in the cabin at the end of the path. David's legs felt weak. Kay. Jennifer's middle name was Kayla. They walked down the path, Rebecca slightly behind him, giving him space. The cabin was small and weathered, with a garden out front and wind chimes hanging from the porch. Before David could knock, the door opened. The woman who stood there was thin, her hair longer than Jennifer used to wear it, streaked with gray that hadn't been there before. But the eyes were the same. Those were Jennifer's eyes. David, she whispered. He couldn't speak, couldn't move. It was her. It was really her. You should come inside, Jennifer said quietly. The cabin was simple but comfortable. Photography equipment filled one corner, prints covering the walls. David recognized her style immediately. These were definitely her photos. They sat at a small wooden table. Rebecca started to excuse herself, but Jennifer shook her head. Stay, you came all this way. You deserve to hear this too. What happened? David finally managed to ask. Everyone thought you were dead. We searched for you. For weeks. Jennifer's hands shook as she poured tea from a kettle. I know. I heard about the search. That was the hardest part. Then why? Why did you do this to us? Tears rolled down Jennifer's face. Because I was drowning, David. I was so unhappy, and I didn't know how to tell anyone. Everyone thought I had this perfect life, following my dreams, doing what I loved, but I was barely surviving, she explained haltingly. The photography business had been failing. She was deep in debt, but too proud to admit it. She'd started having panic attacks so severe she couldn't leave her apartment for days. And underneath everything was a depression so dark she'd started thinking about ending her life. That last hike, she said, I went there to think, to decide if I wanted to keep living. And while I was up there, I realized I didn't want to die. I just wanted to disappear from that life. I wanted to be someone else. You could have told me, David said, his own tears falling now. I would have helped you. I know you would have. That's exactly why I couldn't. You would have tried to fix everything to save me. And I needed to save myself. She told them about the years since. How she'd hiked out the back way, caught a bus to another state, lived on cash for months. Eventually she'd found this community, people who asked no questions and accepted her as Kay. She'd slowly build a new life, a simpler one. She took photos for herself now, not for clients. She grew her own food. She found peace. I think about you every day, Jennifer said. About Mom and Dad, about everyone I left behind. But I also know that if I'd stayed, I wouldn't be alive right now. I was that close to the edge. Rebecca spoke for the first time. I understand. More than you know. Jennifer looked at her with recognition, not of her face, but of what she represented. Another person who'd walked away from a life that was destroying them. David sat there, trying to process everything. His sister was alive. That was the good news, the miracle he'd been praying for. But she'd chosen to leave. She'd chosen to let them all think she was dead rather than reach out for help. The anger and relief warred inside him, so intense he felt sick. I don't know if I can forgive this, he said finally. I don't know if Mom and Dad can either. I know, Jennifer said. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just explaining. Are you happy now? David asked. Was it worth it? Jennifer thought about it. I'm alive. That has to count for something. They stayed for hours, talking and crying and sometimes just sitting in silence. Rebecca mostly listened, occasionally asking a gentle question that helped them both express things they were struggling to. Saydat as the sun started to set, Jennifer walked them back to their car. What will you tell Mom and Dad? She asked. David looked at his sister, at this woman who was and wasn't the person he'd known. I don't know yet. That's not a decision I can make right now. I understand. He hugged her then, probably harder than he should have. She hugged him back just as tight. I'm sorry, she whispered. For everything. For the pain I caused. I'm sorry I didn't see how much you were struggling, he replied. As they drove away, David watched the cabin disappear in the rearview mirror. Rebecca reached over and squeezed his hand. You okay? She asked. No, he admitted. But maybe I will be someday. The drive back was quieter than the drive there. David spent hours just staring out the window, lost in thoughts he didn't know how to organize. Rebecca gave him space, playing soft music and occasionally pointing out interesting scenery, but never pushing him to talk. It wasn't until they stopped for the night at another small motel that David finally broke down. They'd gotten burgers from a place across the street and were eating in his room. Because neither of them wanted to be alone. I don't understand how I'm supposed to feel, he said suddenly. Am I supposed to be happy she's alive? Angry she left? Guilty I didn't see the signs? Rebecca set down her burger. You're allowed to feel all of those things at once. Feelings don't have to make logical sense. But how do I tell my parents? How do I explain that their daughter has been alive for 4 years but chose not to contact them? Maybe you start by understanding why she made that choice. David shook his head. You heard her story. I get that she was struggling. But there were other options. Therapy, medication, reaching out to family. She didn't have to fake her death, didn't she? Rebecca asked gently. Think about what she said. She felt trapped. Everyone had expectations of her. She was drowning but felt like she couldn't show weakness. Sometimes the only way out feels like complete escape. You're defending her because you did the same thing. I'm not defending her. I'm trying to help you understand her. There's a difference. David stood up and paced the small room. My wife left me because she said I couldn't let go of Jennifer. My parents barely speak anymore because the grief destroyed their marriage. Our entire family fell apart. And for what? So Jennifer could live in the woods and take pictures? Your family fell apart because of how you all handled the grief, Rebecca said carefully. Not because of what Jennifer did. She made her choice. Each of you made choices about how to respond. That's not fair. Life isn't fair. Trust me, I learned that lesson early. They sat in tense silence. David knew Rebecca was right, but he wasn't ready to admit it. The anger felt good, cleaner than the complicated mess of other emotions churning inside him. When I left my community, Rebecca said after a while, I didn't tell anyone. I just disappeared one night. For all I know, they think I'm dead. They probably held a funeral, said prayers, mourned. And I've never reached out to tell them otherwise. That's different. They were controlling you, abusing you, and Jennifer felt like her life was killing her. Maybe not in the same way, but the desperation was real. When you're drowning, you don't think clearly about who you'll hurt when you try to save yourself. You just know you need air. David sat back down, suddenly exhausted. I wanted her to be dead. Rebecca looked shocked. What? Not literally. But I mean, if she died in an accident, that would have been clean. Horrible, but clean. This is so much messier. Now I have to accept that she chose to hurt us. That's harder than accepting random tragedy. I know. Over the next few hours, they talked more honestly than they had before. David admitted how much his marriage had struggled even before Jennifer disappeared. How he'd thrown himself into the search partly to avoid dealing with his own unhappiness. How finding Jennifer alive should feel like a miracle, but instead felt like opening a wound that had finally started to scar over. Rebecca shared more about her life after leaving the compound. The years of poverty, of not knowing how to function in normal society. The relationships she'd ruined because she didn't understand how to be close to someone. The constant feeling that she was pretending to be human rather than actually being one. That's why I said it that way in the coffee shop, she explained. Why do your eyes stay on me, human? Because sometimes I still feel like I'm on the outside looking in. Like everyone else got an instruction manual for life and I'm just improvising. I feel that way too, David admitted. Everyone else seems to know how to move forward, how to accept loss and keep living. I'm stuck. Maybe we're both stuck, Rebecca said. But at least we're stuck together. Something about that made David laugh despite everything. Great, to broken people trying to figure out life. Better than being alone. They talked until nearly dawn. At some point, the conversation shifted from Jennifer to their own lives. What they wanted, what scared them, what kept them going. David realized he hadn't talked to anyone this honestly in years. Maybe ever. What are you going to do now? Rebecca asked as the sun started to rise. About Jennifer, I don't know. I need time to think, to process all this. And your parents? I'll tell them eventually. They deserve to know she's alive. But not yet. I need to figure out how I feel about it first. Rebecca nodded. That's fair. They checked out of the motel and continued driving. By afternoon, they were back in the city. Rebecca directed him to her apartment, a small place in an older building. Do you want to come up? She asked. I make terrible coffee, but I have good tea. David smiled. Yeah, I'd like that. Her apartment was exactly what he expected. Minimal furniture, but every surface covered with books and notebooks. A wall full of index cards with observations about human behavior. A desk pile with research papers. Welcome to my brain, Rebecca said with a self-deprecating laugh. It's messy. I like it. It feels real. They sat on her worn couch, drinking tea and watching the city through her window. People walked by below, living their normal lives, unaware of the complicated stories happening all around them. Can I ask you something? David said. When you approached me in the coffee shop, was it really just for your research? Rebecca was quiet for a moment. Honestly, no. Yes, I'm interested in grief and isolation. But the real reason I came over was because I'd seen you there before. Multiple times. And every time, You looked so sad, but also so present. Like you were really seeing the world even though it hurt to look at it, and that interested you? It made me feel less alone. I thought, here's someone else who feels separate from everything. Someone who might understand. David set down his tea. I'm glad you asked that question. Even though it led to all this mess with Jennifer. I'm glad. Me too. They sat in comfortable silence. To people who'd found each other by accident and helped each other face truths they'd been avoiding. What happens now? David asked. With us, I mean, Rebecca smiled. I don't know. Maybe we keep meeting. Keep talking. Keep trying to figure out this being human thing together. I like that. As David drove home that evening, he felt different. Not healed, not resolved, but changed. He found his sister and lost her again in a different way. But he'd also found something unexpected. A friend who understood what it meant to feel lost in the world. Someone who didn't expect him to have all the answers. Maybe that was enough for now. 6 months passed like water flowing over stones, gradually reshaping everything. David didn't go back to the coffee shop right away. The place held too many memories now. Too many associations with the person he'd been when he was frozen in grief. Instead, he started going to other places. Parks, libraries, different cafes. Rebecca often joined him, and they'd spend hours just existing together. Sometimes talking, sometimes sitting in comfortable silence. She was working on her book, and he'd started seeing a therapist. Finally unpacking the years of unprocessed emotions, he told his parents about Jennifer. That conversation had been one of the hardest things he'd ever done. His mother had cried for hours, cycling through relief and anger and grief all over again. His father had been quieter, but David saw the pain in his eyes. The knowledge that their daughter had chosen to stay away was harder to accept. Then believing she'd died accidentally, they'd asked if they could visit her. David had given them the information, but made it clear that Jennifer might not want to see them. That choice was hers to make. We just need to know she's alive, his mother had said. Even if we never see her again, knowing she's out there somewhere is better than the not knowing. David understood that better now. The not knowing had been its own special torture. At least now they had answers, even if those answers weren't what they'd hoped for. His relationship with Rebecca had deepened in unexpected ways. They weren't romantic, exactly, though there was an intimacy between them that went beyond friendship. They'd become each other's anchor, the person they could be completely honest with. Rebecca had finished her book. It wasn't the academic text she'd originally planned. Instead, it had become something more personal, exploring how people navigate loss and loneliness in a world that expects everyone to have everything figured out. She'd asked David's permission to include his story, and he'd agreed, as long as names were changed. Reading his experience through her eyes had been strange but healing. She'd somehow captured the essence of his pain without making him feel exposed. The book's dedication page reads simply, "For those still learning how to be human." On a Friday afternoon in spring, David found himself back at the original coffee shop for the first time in months. He'd been meeting with a group there, people who'd experienced loss and were trying to support each other through it. He'd started facilitating the meetings after his therapist suggested that helping others might help him continue his own healing. The group had just finished, and David was packing up his things when Rebecca walked in. She spotted him immediately and smiled, weaving through the tables to reach him. "You look different," she said as she sat down. "Different how?" "More here. Like you're actually inhabiting your life instead of watching it happen." David thought about that. She was right. Somewhere over the past months, he'd stopped feeling like a ghost in his own existence. "You look different too," he said. "More relaxed. My book comes out next week. I'm terrified. It's going to do great. You're an amazing writer." They ordered coffee and sat by the same window where they first really talked. Outside, spring flowers were blooming. People were walking with lighter steps. The whole city felt like it was waking up from winter. "I heard from Jennifer," David said casually. Rebecca's eyes widened. "Really? When?" "Last week. She sent a letter. Actual paper letter. Can you believe it? No return address, but postmarked from Oregon." "What did it say?" David pulled the folded paper from his pocket. He'd been carrying it around, reading it over and over. She said she knows I'm angry, that she doesn't expect forgiveness. But she wanted me to know that finding peace doesn't mean she didn't love us. It just means she loved herself enough to save her own life. That's beautiful. Rebecca said softly. She also said our parents visited. They spent a whole day together. She said it was hard but good. They're going to try to build something new, even if it can't be what it was before. How do you feel about that? David folded the letter carefully and put it back in his pocket. I feel okay. Not great, not completely at peace, but okay. I'm learning that's enough. They talked about Rebecca's book launch, about the reading she'd be doing at a local bookstore, about the interview requests she was getting from podcasts and magazines. She was nervous about the attention, worried that people would judge her for her past. Let them. David said, "You told your truth. That takes courage." "I learned that from you," she replied. "You taught me that being honest about pain doesn't make you weak." As the afternoon faded into evening, they moved from coffee to dinner at a small restaurant nearby. They talked about everything and nothing. The weird customer in Rebecca's building who collected rubber ducks. The new project David was starting at work. The movie they both wanted to see. Normal things. Human things. "Can I tell you something?" David said as they walked back toward their cars. "That first day, when you asked why my eyes stayed on you, I didn't really answer honestly." "What do you mean?" "You asked why I was looking at you. I said you reminded me of Jennifer. That was partly true. But the real reason was that you looked like you were trying to solve a puzzle. Like you were studying everyone, trying to understand something just out of reach. And I realized I was doing the same thing." Rebecca stopped walking. "What were we both trying to understand?" "How to live," David said simply. "How to be part of the world instead of separate from it. You were doing it because you never learned. I was doing it because I forgot how. And now I think we're figuring it out, together." Rebecca smiled, her eyes bright. "You know what's funny? In my research, I found that the most resilient people aren't the ones who never experience trauma or loss. They're the ones who find connection afterward, who let themselves be vulnerable enough to let others in." Is that going to be in your next book? "Maybe, if you'll let me keep telling your story." "Our story," David corrected. They reached their cars, but neither of them moved to leave. The night was warm, the street was quiet, and neither of them wanted the day to end. "Why do your eyes stay on me, human?" Rebecca asked suddenly, repeating her question from that first day. David thought about it seriously. "Because when I look at you, I see someone who understands that life is complicated and messy and sometimes really hard. But you keep showing up anyway. You keep trying. And that reminds me to do the same." "That's a better answer than the first one. I've had time to practice." They hugged goodbye, promising to meet again soon. As David drove home, he thought about how much had changed. He found his sister and lost her in a new way. His marriage had ended. His life had been turned inside out. But he also found something he hadn't been looking for. A friendship that felt like coming home. A purpose in helping others navigate their grief. A slowly growing sense that maybe, eventually, he could be whole again. His apartment didn't feel empty anymore when he walked in. It felt like a space he actually lived in rather than a place he was haunting. He made tea, Rebecca's influence showing through, and sat by his window. Below, the city continued its evening routine. People coming home from work, walking dogs, meeting friends for dinner. All those normal, human moments he'd spent so long observing from the outside. But he wasn't on the outside anymore. He was part of it now. His phone buzzed with a message from Rebecca. "Thank you for everything. For letting me ask difficult questions. For being honest with your answers. For showing me what real friendship looks like." David smiled and typed back, "Thank you for asking the question in the first place. For seeing me when I felt invisible. For reminding me that it's okay to still be learning how to live." He set down his phone and picked up a notebook. His therapist had suggested journaling, and he resisted at first. But lately, he'd been writing down his thoughts, trying to make sense of everything. He wrote about Jennifer, about the complicated mix of love and anger and acceptance he felt, about his parents and their slow healing, about the support group and how helping others had helped him. But mostly, He wrote about Rebecca, about how one strange question from a stranger in a coffee shop had changed everything, about how sometimes the most important connections come when we're brave enough to ask honest questions and give honest answers. Outside his window, lights flickered on apartments across the street. Every window was a life, a story, a collection of joys and sorrows. Once, he watched those windows and felt separate from all of them. Now he understood he was just another window in the city, another person trying to figure out how to live well and love deeply and survive the hard parts. Jennifer had found her peace by leaving. David was finding his by staying and learning to be present. There was no right answer, no perfect way to handle pain. There was just the choice to keep trying, to keep showing up, to keep being honest about the struggles. He thought about the title of Rebecca's book, Learning to be Human, Stories of Loss and Connection in the Modern World. That's what they've both been doing all along, learning to be human. Not perfectly, not easily, but genuinely, and maybe that was enough.